When I walked into the courtroom in a rain-soaked coat, my sister glanced at her lawyer and smirked like this was already over. My dad let out a low chuckle and my mom just huffed, staring past me like I was an inconvenience. Her lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor, this is a simple inheritance dispute." I did not argue. I set one folder on the table, still damp from the rain. The judge stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went wide as he whispered, "I cannot believe it is her." Silence swallowed the room. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old, and today I watched my family try to steal the last piece of my grandfather under the guise of legal protocol. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. The heavy oak doors of the Manhattan courthouse closed behind me, shutting out the torrential downpour outside. Water dripped from the hem of my trench coat, forming a small puddle on the polished marble floor. I simply walked down the center aisle toward the front of the courtroom. Sitting at the plaintiff's table was my entire family, looking like an advertisement for unearned wealth. My younger sister Vanessa sat draped in a designer wool coat. She rolled her eyes dramatically the moment she saw me dripping wet. Vanessa immediately leaned her head on the shoulder of her husband Jamal. Jamal was a 32-year-old African-American man who ran a boutique real estate investment fund in the city. He wore a custom-tailored suit and a gold watch that caught the fluorescent lights. He oozed arrogance, looking at me with undisguised contempt. Next to them sat my parents, Richard and Patricia. Even from 20 feet away, I could hear my mother whispering loud enough for the gallery to hear. "Look at her cheap coat," she sneered. "She could not even dress properly for court." My father adjusted his expensive tie and chuckled, shaking his head in agreement. They were exactly as I remembered them, superficial, cruel, and completely obsessed with appearances. They had summoned me here for one reason: to formally strip me of the modest trust fund my grandfather had left in my name. Mr. Kensington, their highly paid family lawyer, stood up and adjusted his suit jacket. He flashed a condescending smile in my direction before addressing the bench. "Your Honor," Kensington said, his voice echoing in the large room, "we are here today to resolve a very simple and straightforward inheritance dispute. As you can see from the filings, my clients are requesting that the court dismiss Audrey from the proceedings entirely. She is a delusional college dropout trying to contest a sealed family trust that rightfully belongs to the responsible members of this family." Judge Mitchell, a stern man with silver hair, looked over his glasses at me. He seemed unimpressed by my damp appearance, but maintained his professional demeanor. I stood quietly at the defense table, letting the water drip from my sleeves. Kensington continued his theatrics, pacing in front of the judge. "Your Honor, the trust was intended for family members who uphold the values and financial responsibilities expected by the late patriarch. Audrey does not meet any of those criteria. She has been completely estranged for 11 years. She brings no value to this estate, and her presence here is a desperate attempt to grab money she did not earn." At that moment, Jamal decided to chime in, leaning back in his leather chair with a booming laugh. He did not even bother standing up to address the court. "Come on, Your Honor," Jamal scoffed, waving a dismissive hand at me. "Let us be real here. She has not held a real job since she failed out of state college 11 years ago. She was kicked out of the house because she was too lazy to do honest work. Now she shows up soaking wet looking for a handout from my wife and my in-laws. It is pathetic. The court should award the grandfather's final estate fully to Vanessa and me, so we can manage it properly through my real estate fund." I let his words hang in the air. 11 years ago, my parents had thrown me out onto the street with nothing but a suitcase because I refused to sign my name onto their fraudulent tax documents. They labeled me a dropout and a failure to cover up their own crimes. They told everyone I was a loser who could not handle academic pressure. They had no idea that the quiet girl they kicked out had become the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Forensic Ventures, a private equity and forensic accounting firm that specialized in liquidating corrupt corporations. They did not know that I had just finished dismantling a major bank on the East Coast. Judge Mitchell cleared his throat, looking down at the paperwork Kensington had provided. Miss Audrey, the judge said carefully, "Your family has filed a motion to invalidate your claim to the trust based on estrangement and financial instability. Do you have any formal response or legal representation present today?" I finally stepped forward. My wet shoes squeaked slightly on the wood floor. I reached into my leather messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. The edges of the paper were slightly damp from the storm outside, but the seal on the front was perfectly intact. "I do not need a lawyer, Your Honor," I said. I placed the folder in front of Judge Mitchell. "I am here for a completely different matter." Judge Mitchell frowned at it. He broke the seal. He read the first page. His eyes darted to me. He dropped his pen. He leaned forward and whispered, "I cannot believe it." The entire courtroom froze. Judge Mitchell picked up the document, scanning the letterhead. He looked from the thick stack of papers back to me, his stern expression dissolving into shock. He adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat, trying to speak. "Miss Audrey," he stammered, "is this document authentic? Are you the sole signatory on this filing?" I nodded once. "I am, Your Honor. Everything in that folder is binding." Jamal slammed his hand flat against the heavy oak table. He leaned aggressively toward the bench, his suit straining. "Your Honor," Jamal barked, "we will not read this garbage. She is a fraud. We submitted our motion for dismissal and we demand a ruling right now. Sign the order and give us the trust so we can leave. We have businesses to run." Judge Mitchell gripped his gavel tightly, his face turning deep crimson. He brought the mallet down with a sharp crack that echoed off the high ceiling. "Quiet!" Judge Mitchell roared, pointing at Jamal. "Do not ever raise your voice in my courtroom again. Do you have any idea who you are standing next to?" "My mother." Patricia scoffed from her seat, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She let out a sharp, patronizing laugh that I recognized instantly from my miserable childhood. "Yes, Your Honor." Patricia sneered, her voice dripping with toxic venom. "We know exactly who she is. She is our estranged daughter who was too lazy to finish her degree. She could not handle the pressure of state college 11 years ago, so she dropped out and embarrassed our entire family. She has been a useless burden her entire life, and now she is just trying to extort us for a quick payout." Judge Mitchell slammed his gavel down a second time, cutting her off completely. "You are gravely mistaken, madam," the judge stated, his tone laced with a mixture of absolute awe and fierce reprimand. He picked up the first page of my damp folder and held it up high for the entire courtroom to see clearly. "This woman standing before you is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Forensic Ventures." A collective gasp rippled through the crowded gallery behind us. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a brief second, staring at me in disbelief. My father's arrogant smirk instantly vanished from his aging face. He sat up incredibly straight, his eyes darting frantically between me and the furious judge. Vanessa stopped leaning on Jamal, her face suddenly going completely pale. I stood perfectly still, letting the harsh reality of the judge's words sink deep into their greedy minds. Apex Forensic Ventures was not just a regular corporate company. It was the absolute apex predator of the Wall Street financial district. We specialized in aggressive corporate restructuring and hostile takeovers of failing banking institutions. We bought out bad commercial loans, audited fraudulent accounting practices, and dismantled corrupt business empires piece by piece. Judge Mitchell looked directly at my terrified parents. 2 days ago, the judge continued, his voice carrying across the perfectly silent room. This woman personally oversaw the liquidation of East Coast Fidelity Bank. She uncovered their hidden corporate liabilities, seized their commercial assets, and restructured their entire holding portfolio. She is one of the most powerful financial auditors in the United States today. She is certainly not here to contest a trivial $2 million family trust. Mr. Kensington, my family's extremely expensive lawyer, slowly sank back into his leather chair. His face had gone completely white, as if he had just seen a ghost. He realized exactly what was happening in this room. Kensington knew perfectly well that a massive firm like mine did not step inside a small claims courtroom unless we were hunting something much bigger than a standard inheritance dispute. Jamal, however, remained aggressively clueless to the danger closing in around him. He puffed out his chest, trying desperately to regain control of the shifting room. "So what?" Jamal sneered, crossing his muscular arms tightly. "Good for her. She conned some rich investors and bought a failing bank. That has absolutely nothing to do with my real estate fund or this family trust. She is still a pathetic dropout, and she still has no legal claim to this estate." I turned slowly to face Jamal. The rain had finally stopped dripping from my heavy coat, but the sharp chill in my voice was far colder than the winter storm raging outside. I looked him dead in the eyes, watching his arrogant bravado violently clash with his underlying financial insecurity. "I am not here for the inheritance, Jamal," I said, my voice dead calm and perfectly even. "I am here because my firm just finished conducting a highly comprehensive forensic audit of your supposedly impenetrable Manhattan real estate portfolio." Jamal's confident expression faltered slightly, but he forced a very loud and obnoxious scoff. "You cannot legally touch my investment portfolio," he fired back, pointing a finger at me. "My assets are heavily protected by top-tier lawyers. You are completely out of your league, little girl." I took a single deliberate step toward him. "Your entire fund is built on fraudulent leverage," I explained, letting my sharp words strike him like physical blows. "You used illegal mezzanine financing to falsely inflate your commercial property values. When the commercial real estate market dipped significantly last quarter, you defaulted on 3 major commercial loans. You foolishly thought you could hide those massive defaults by moving the toxic debt into offshore shell companies." I smiled coldly, watching the horrific realization slowly creep into his dark eyes. "But you forgot that those offshore shell companies eventually have to answer to their primary domestic lenders. When the regional banks panicked, they auctioned off your toxic debt for pennies on the dollar. My firm, Apex Forensic Ventures, bought every single one of those defaulted loans yesterday afternoon. I am not here to contest a grandfather's will. I am your largest creditor." Judge Mitchell brought his gavel down with a deafening crack that shattered the heavy silence. He announced the courtroom was immediately adjourned in chaos as he ordered the bailiff to clear the floor. My family erupted into a frantic chorus of panicked whispers and outraged shouts. Vanessa grabbed her designer handbag so fast that it spilled her cosmetics across the wooden benches. My father, Richard, stood paralyzed by the defense table with his jaw clenched tight. He stared at me as if a stranger had replaced the daughter he had thrown away 11 years ago. Mr. Kensington packed his briefcase with trembling hands, refusing to make eye contact with his wealthy clients. He sprinted down the center aisle to escape the financial bloodbath about to occur. I calmly picked up my folder and turned my back on the frantic scene. My wet heels clicked against the floor as I walked out the heavy oak doors. The wide marble hallway outside the courtroom felt freezing cold. Before I could reach the elevators, a sharp pain dug fiercely into my right bicep. Patricia grabbed my arm from behind. Her manicured acrylic nails pierced through the thick fabric of my trench coat. She yanked me backward with desperate physical force. Her face was flushed with absolute narcissistic rage. The elegant society mother facade she usually wore had completely melted away to reveal the vicious woman who used to lock me out of the house for getting a bad grade. "What kind of sick game is this?" she hissed through gritted teeth. Her eyes darted around the empty corridor to make sure no wealthy socialites were watching her lose her mind. "Who are you sleeping with to get fake Wall Street credentials? You are nothing but a lazy failure who humiliated us. Did you hire someone to print fake documents just to ruin your sister's special day? Tell me the truth right now." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. Years ago, that simple gesture would have sent me into a spiral of paralyzing anxiety. I would have cried and begged for her to let me go. I would have apologized for existing. Now I felt absolutely nothing but a profound pity for a woman who could only feel powerful by destroying her own child. Before I could even respond to her deranged accusation, a large shadow fell over us. Jamal stepped right into my personal space. He used his impressive height and broad, athletic build to try and physically intimidate me. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and glared down at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He thought he could still bully me the way he bullied his junior analysts in his fancy New York office. "You think you can play finance with me?" Jamal growled, stepping close. I could smell his strong cologne. "You think you are smart because you learned basic accounting buzzwords. Let me educate you, little girl. I run a top-tier Manhattan real estate portfolio. I manage hundreds of millions for the elite investors in this city. My legal team is comprised of sharks who eat fraudulent auditors like you for breakfast. You cannot intimidate me with fake leverage." He laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the cold marble walls. He pointed a large finger directly at my face. "My assets are shielded tightly in offshore Cayman trusts." Jamal boasted, his arrogant ego blinding him to the massive legal trap he was standing in. "I have layers of impenetrable corporate protection. A little girl playing auditor cannot touch my money. You cannot touch my buildings, and you certainly cannot touch my lifestyle. You are going to walk back into that courtroom, apologize to the judge for wasting his time, and sign away your claim to the grandfather trust. If you do not do exactly what I say, I will ensure my lawyers bankrupt whatever pathetic scam company you are running." Vanessa flanked him on the other side, nodding vigorously. She crossed her arms and glared at me with a smug, satisfied grin. She truly believed her wealthy, powerful husband had just put me back in my miserable place. Richard stood a few feet away, watching the entire exchange with a calculating silence. He was waiting to see if Jamal could successfully squash the massive threat I posed to their luxurious lifestyle. I stood perfectly still under his looming shadow. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I let him finish his entire desperate monologue. I slowly reached over and grabbed my mother's wrist. With one effortless motion, I brushed Patricia's hand off my arm. She gasped in shock, stumbling back a half step, as if my casual dismissal was a physical blow to her fragile ego. I turned my full, unwavering attention back to my arrogant brother-in-law. "Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet volume. "You routed my grandfather's original trust money through a complex shell company to buy your very first Bronx apartment complex 7 years ago. You needed seed capital to launch your fancy real estate fund, and my family happily handed you my rightful inheritance to fund your ambition." His smug grin instantly vanished. His dark eyes widened in sudden, genuine terror. He opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. "You thought you were a financial genius because you funneled that stolen seed money through a series of anonymous limited liability corporations." I continued, stepping forward, forcing him to take a defensive step back. "You thought hiding the profits in the Cayman Islands made you invincible. But you forgot one crucial thing about offshore accounts, Jamal. They require clean domestic wires to establish the initial funding route. If the original domestic wire is tainted by theft or fraud, every subsequent transaction becomes a federal crime." I smiled, tapping my damp folder against his chest. "And I trace dirty wires for a living right here in New York." Jamal stared at the damp folder. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant mask slipped, revealing the terrified fraud underneath. But his ego was too massive to accept defeat. He swatted my hand away. A loud, booming laugh erupted from his chest, echoing down the marble corridor. It was a forced, theatrical sound, designed to reassure his panicking wife and my horrified parents. He took a step back, shaking his head. "You expect me to believe this fabricated nonsense?" he mocked, adjusting his silk tie. "You think you can waltz in here in a cheap wet coat and terrify me with accounting buzzwords? Let me explain how the real world works, little girl. My legal department consists of 30 ruthless litigators. They specialize in destroying frivolous lawsuits from bitter estranged relatives. You have absolutely nothing on me. Every dollar flowing through my real estate fund is scrubbed clean. You are bluffing." This spectacle is a desperate bluff from a failed college dropout who wants a piece of my wealth. Vanessa immediately rallied behind her husband, glaring at me. She is just jealous, Vanessa hissed. She failed out of school and ruined her own life, so now she wants to ruin ours. We should call security. Patricia stepped forward again. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. You are sick, Audrey, she snapped. Coming here to threaten your successful brother-in-law with fake corporate jargon is a new low even for you. Your father and I are disgusted by your behavior. We are going to counter-sue you for defamation. We will make sure you never find employment in this city again. Only my father Richard remained completely silent. He stood frozen near the courtroom doors, his eyes locked intensely on the damp folder in my hand. Unlike his naive wife and arrogant daughter, Richard actually understood the brutal mechanisms of high-level corporate finance. He recognized the terrifying, unwavering confidence radiating from my rigid posture. He knew that nobody walked into a sealed trust hearing claiming to represent Apex Forensic Ventures unless they had the lethal ammunition to back it up perfectly. He swallowed hard, the color draining steadily from his aging face as he watched the inevitable destruction of his family unfold before his eyes. He opened his mouth to warn Jamal, but no sound emerged. I ignored my mother and sister entirely, keeping my unwavering gaze locked firmly on Jamal. I slowly pulled back my left sleeve, revealing the sleek silver face of my luxury timepiece. I tapped the glass softly with my index finger, making sure he watched the deliberate movement. It is exactly 10:30 in the morning, I stated, my voice cutting through their chaotic noise like a sharp blade. The financial markets have been officially open for exactly 1 hour, Jamal scoffed, rolling his dark eyes. So what, he demanded, crossing his arms tightly over his broad chest. Are you going to tell me my stock portfolio went down a fraction of a percent today? I am terrified, Audrey, simply terrified. I smiled a cold, predatory smile. I did not say another word. The suffocating silence stretched between us for 5 agonizing seconds. Then, right on cue, a sharp, frantic buzzing sound erupted from the inside pocket of Jamal's tailored suit jacket. The sudden noise made Vanessa jump slightly. Jamal let out an exasperated sigh, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. He glanced at the glowing screen. His arrogant smirk returned instantly. It is my chief financial officer, Jamal announced, holding the phone up for my entire family to see. He probably needs my executive approval to close another multi-million-dollar property acquisition. This is what real high-stakes business looks like, Audrey. Pay close attention. You might actually learn something useful for once. Jamal pressed the button to accept the call, bringing the device to his ear. Talk to me, he answered, his voice booming down the hallway. Tell me the good news about the Brooklyn commercial acquisition. The voice on the other end of the line was heavily muffled, but the frantic panic in the caller's tone was unmistakable. I watched closely as the arrogant smirk on Jamal's face froze completely. Within 3 seconds, his confident, powerful posture completely dissolved. His broad, athletic shoulders slumped forward. The healthy color vanished entirely from his face, leaving him looking physically ill. His dark eyes widened in absolute horror as he listened to his panicked executive explain the apocalyptic financial disaster unfolding at his headquarters. What do you mean they are frozen? Jamal barked, his voice cracking with sudden desperation. That is impossible. Call the bank right now. Threaten to sue everyone in that building. Who gave the authorization for a federal hold? What federal agency are we dealing with here? Jamal stopped speaking abruptly. His mouth hung open in silent shock. The smartphone slipped from his trembling hand, dropping to his side. He stared blindly at the floor, unable to process the catastrophic reality of his situation. Jamal, what is wrong? Vanessa asked, her voice shrill with rising panic. What happened to the Brooklyn deal? Jamal did not look at his demanding wife. He slowly lifted his heavy head and stared at me with the hollow, defeated eyes of a broken man. The Securities and Exchange Commission just froze every single one of my primary operating accounts, Jamal whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. They froze the offshore routing accounts, too. They told my team that my entire corporate portfolio is under an emergency federal freeze pending a forensic audit initiated by Apex Forensic Ventures. The deafening silence that followed his broken words was satisfying. The arrogant empire they had built on my stolen inheritance was officially burning to the ground. I calmly buttoned my damp trench coat and turned away from their horrified faces. I began walking slowly toward the brass elevator banks at the far end of the corridor. "See you at Thanksgiving, family," I called over my shoulder without looking back. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of their shattered faces. I rode down to the lobby feeling a profound sense of clarity. For 11 years I had carried the heavy weight of their rejection, but now that burden belonged entirely to them. I stepped out of the courthouse and into the waiting town car, heading straight back to my Manhattan office. My work for the day was far from over. However, I knew my family too well to believe they would simply surrender and accept their catastrophic financial ruin without a vicious fight. They were desperate people who relied entirely on public perception to survive their hollow lives. When cornered rats cannot bite, they squeal. By the time my car pulled up to the Apex Forensic Ventures headquarters, Vanessa and Patricia had already pivoted their defensive strategy. They realized they could not beat me in a federal courtroom or survive a legitimate financial audit, so they resorted to the only battlefield they actually understood: modern warfare through social media. They launched a highly aggressive and meticulously calculated smear campaign designed to weaponize cancel culture against me. Vanessa had spent years building a superficial online presence boasting over 50,000 followers who consumed her daily posts about luxury shopping and elite socialite events. Now she was going to use that exact audience to destroy my reputation before I could fully dismantle her husband's fraudulent empire. I walked into my corner office, and my lead communications director immediately handed me a tablet. "You need to see this right now," she said, her expression completely grim. I looked down at the bright screen. Vanessa was broadcasting live on Instagram. She was sitting on the velvet couch in my parents' living room, looking purposefully disheveled and frantic. Her designer makeup was artfully smudged beneath her eyes to create the perfect illusion of a woman in deep distress. She stared directly into the camera lens and let out a dramatic, heavy sob. "Guys, I need your help," Vanessa cried, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "My family is under a malicious and targeted attack today. My estranged sister Audrey has returned after 11 years of completely abandoning us. She has always been severely mentally unstable, but now she has gone too far. She is using illegal hacking methods and stolen corporate credentials to systematically destroy my hard-working, self-made African-American husband's business. Jamal has spent his entire life overcoming systemic obstacles to build his real estate fund, and now this deranged woman is using cyber terrorism to freeze his accounts and ruin his spotless reputation. Please share this video. We are terrified for our safety and our livelihood." The live viewer count skyrocketed as Vanessa continued her Oscar-worthy performance. The comments section flooded with instant outrage and blind sympathy. Then, right on cue, Patricia stepped into the video frame. She sat down next to Vanessa and wrapped a comforting arm around her weeping daughter's shoulders. My mother looked at the camera with the exhausted, sorrowful expression of a dedicated martyr. "It breaks my heart to speak about this publicly," Patricia said, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk tissue. "As a mother, I tried absolutely everything to save my troubled daughter. We gave Audrey every advantage, every opportunity for therapy and rehabilitation, but her paranoia and deep resentment simply consumed her. When she failed out of college, she refused our help and ran away. We spent years searching for her, praying for her safe recovery. To see her return now fueled by such unhinged malice and attacking her innocent brother-in-law is a tragedy I can barely process. We are just trying to protect our family from her dangerous delusions." The video was an absolute masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. They hit every single emotional trigger point designed to manipulate the modern digital audience. They weaponized race, they weaponized mental health, and they weaponized the sacred image of a protective family unit. Within 2 hours, the broadcast went completely viral. It was clipped, shared, and reposted across multiple social media platforms. The public outrage machine churned exactly as they had planned. Strangers who knew absolutely nothing about the complex financial fraud Jamal had committed began organizing online campaigns to boycott my supposed hacking syndicate. But the most immediate fallout did not happen online. It happened directly to my father. Richard had spent decades carefully curating a pristine image among the elite financial circles of New York. As the viral video spread through the wealthy networks, his personal phone began to ring relentlessly. Corporate investors, board members, and his powerful country club friends started calling him, demanding immediate explanations. They were not calling to offer their sympathies. They were calling because the ugly public scandal threatened their own associated reputations. I sat at my desk watching the financial news tickers when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I let it go straight to voicemail, knowing exactly who was calling. A minute later, an audio file appeared in my inbox. I clicked play, and my father's furious voice filled my quiet office. "Audrey, you have pushed this too far." Richard snarled, his tone vibrating with absolute panic and rage. "My investors are breathing down my neck. The country club president just called me demanding I handle my crazy daughter before the board revokes my membership. You think you are a genius for freezing Jamal's accounts, but you just signed your own death warrant. Your mother and sister have laid the perfect groundwork today. Everyone believes you are completely unhinged. If you do not release the federal hold on that real estate fund by midnight, I am going to petition the state to have you involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward." His heavy breathing echoed through the audio recording as he delivered his final, desperate ultimatum. "I have the best medical lawyers in the state," on retainer Richard threatened. "I will have you declared legally incompetent and mentally unfit to manage any corporate entity. The moment a judge signs that involuntary commitment order, every single legal action you took today becomes completely invalid. Your forensic audit will be erased. Your company will be heavily investigated for acting under the direction of a psychiatric patient. Call off the SEC, Audrey. Call them off right now, or I will lock you inside a padded room for the rest of your miserable life." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I placed my phone face down on the sleek mahogany desk. My father truly believed his elite connections and his ruthless threats would finally break my spirit. He thought the combined weight of public humiliation and the terrifying threat of a forced psychiatric hold would make me surrender my leverage and crawl back into the shadows. He completely misunderstood the woman he was dealing with. He believed I was still the frightened 22-year-old girl he had discarded. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating my resolve. I sat perfectly still in my sleek, high-rise Manhattan office, letting the heavy silence wash over the room after the voicemail ended. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the sprawling skyline of the financial district stretched out like a chessboard. Down there, millions of people were moving through their daily lives, unaware of the brutal corporate warfare being waged 40 stories above the streets. My environment was a fortress of calculated logic and cold data. It was the antithesis of the hysterical emotional manipulation my family was broadcasting to the digital world. I faced my desk. My senior executive assistant, Diana, stood quietly on the other side of the polished mahogany wood. She held a silver tablet containing the newly captured digital evidence. Diana was a ruthless and highly efficient professional who had been by my side since the earliest days of Apex Forensic Ventures. She had just finished logging the viral Instagram video featuring Vanessa and Patricia, alongside the threatening audio file my father Richard had left on my personal voicemail. Diana looked at me with a rare expression of genuine concern furrowing her brow. She knew how damaging false public narratives could be. "The Public Relations Department is standing by on high alert," Diana informed me, her voice maintaining its usual crisp efficiency. "The viral video is gaining significant traction across multiple social media platforms. Several minor financial blogs have already picked up the story, framing our firm as a hostile entity attacking a minority-owned real estate fund. The narrative is heavily skewed against us. Should I instruct the legal team to draft an immediate cease and desist order? We can also have the public relations team issue a formal statement denying the allegations of cyber terrorism. We can shut down their media campaign. I steepled my fingers together, resting my chin on my hands. I looked at the frozen image of my sister Vanessa crying fake tears on the tablet screen. A lesser executive might have panicked. A weaker person might have immediately released a defensive statement trying desperately to prove their own sanity and validate their professional integrity to a mob of anonymous strangers. But I was not the frightened 22-year-old girl they had thrown out into the rain 11 years ago. I had spent over a decade dismantling corrupt billionaires and arrogant executives who thought they were untouchable. I understood the fundamental mechanics of power and the strategic value of absolute silence. No, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Tell the public relations department to stand down completely. Do not draft a press release. Do not issue a statement of defense. Do not send them a cease and desist letter. Diana blinked in surprise, her pen hovering over her digital notepad. But the reputational damage, she started to caution. I held up a single hand to stop her. We are going to do absolutely nothing to stop their digital temper tantrum, I explained, leaning back in my chair. Never interrupt an enemy when they are making a mistake. Every lie they post online, every dramatic interview they give, and every fabricated story they tell their wealthy friends is just another documented count of defamation we can easily leverage in court. I stood up and began pacing slowly across the thick carpet of my office. They are acting entirely out of raw panic and bruised egos, I continued. They believe that if they scream loud enough and cry hard enough, the legal consequences of Jamal's massive federal wire fraud will magically disappear. They are giving us free ammunition. When the federal investigators inevitably subpoena their digital records, those highly dramatic videos will serve as indisputable proof of their malicious intent and their coordinated efforts to obstruct a legitimate federal audit. The internet has a short memory, but federal judges rely heavily on documented perjury. Let them dig their own graves as deep as they possibly can. Diana nodded, her expression shifting from concern to deep understanding. She quickly updated her notes. Understood, she replied, tapping the screen of her tablet. And what about your father's threat regarding the involuntary psychiatric hold? He sounded extremely serious about petitioning the state medical board to have you declared legally incompetent. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Richard has always relied on brute force and his elite country club connections to bully people into submission, I said, walking back to my desk. He honestly believes his wealth makes him an omnipotent god in this city. He thinks he can just purchase a corrupt medical diagnosis to silence me because he has always used his money as a weapon against the vulnerable. But his vast wealth is nothing more than a fragile illusion built on towering mountains of corporate debt. I continued pulling up a classified financial dossier on my encrypted desktop monitor. He uses his personal real estate holding company to finance his lavish lifestyle. He leveraged his primary business assets to secure massive lines of credit from private equity firms. As of yesterday morning, Apex Forensic Ventures quietly acquired the majority stake in the specific private equity firm that holds all of Richard's commercial debt. I turned the monitor so Diana could see the staggering numbers glowing in bright red ink. I looked at Diana with a cold, calculated smile. It is time to initiate Phase 2 of our operation. I instructed, my tone completely devoid of familial mercy. My father loves his pristine country club image more than he loves his own family. He derives all his arrogant power from his perceived financial superiority. Let us see exactly how much his elite friends and loyal investors love him when his corporate credit lines run completely dry overnight. Contact the debt management team immediately. Execute the margin call on Richard's business loans. I want his entire portfolio drained before sunset today. We will watch his fake empire crumble right before his very eyes. Let him experience the true cost of his betrayal. Across the city, my sister Vanessa was completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging down toward her carefully manicured neck. She was standing in the VIP lounge of an ultra-exclusive luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue, determined to prove to her digital audience that our family remained completely untouched by my morning courtroom ambush. She held her smartphone high in the air, broadcasting live to her 50,000 followers. Her face was illuminated by a portable ring light she had forced a sales associate to hold for her. She flashed a brilliant, perfectly white smile that completely masked the sheer panic she must have felt deep down inside. "Listen to me, guys," Vanessa crooned to the camera, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I just want to thank all my real supporters who sent prayers and positive energy today. The truth always wins." My husband Jamal is a self-made genius, and our legal team already handled the pathetic little cyber attack from my estranged sister. She is sick and we are praying for her recovery, but we absolutely refuse to let her toxic energy ruin our blessed day. To celebrate Jamal's massive success, and to show all the jealous haters that we are doing better than ever, I am treating myself to something incredibly special today. Vanessa spun the camera around to showcase a stunning display pedestal. Resting on a bed of black velvet was a breathtaking $15,000 designer handbag. It was crafted from pristine leather and adorned with rare metallic hardware. It was the ultimate status symbol for wealthy socialites, and Vanessa wanted the entire internet to watch her buy it effortlessly. She turned the camera back to her face, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "When people try to drag you down, you just have to elevate your lifestyle," Vanessa bragged, walking confidently toward the sleek marble checkout counter. The sales associate, a highly trained professional in a sharp black suit, stood waiting with a polite retail smile. Vanessa propped her phone against a display vase, ensuring the camera captured a perfect angle of the transaction. She opened her designer wallet and pulled out a heavy, solid metal platinum credit card. The card was linked directly to Jamal's primary operating accounts. She held the metal card up to the camera lens for 2 full seconds, making sure every single viewer recognized the exclusive tier of wealth she possessed. "Ring it up, please," Vanessa commanded, sliding the platinum card across the marble counter. The sales associate nodded, picking up the card and inserting the secure chip into the luxury boutique's sleek payment terminal. Vanessa looked back at her phone screen, blowing a kiss to her audience. As a flood of supportive heart emojis rolled upward, she was at the absolute peak of her fabricated reality. Then the payment terminal emitted a harsh, flat, electronic beep. The sound was sharp and unforgiving. The sales associate frowned slightly, pulling the card out and inspecting the chip. She wiped it softly with a cloth and inserted it a second time. The machine processed for 3 seconds before emitting that exact same rejecting beep. A bold red message flashed across the digital screen. The sales associate looked up, her professional smile wavering as she handed the heavy metal card back to my sister. "I am so sorry, madam," the sales associate said, her voice low but entirely audible to the thousands of people watching the live broadcast. "Your card has been declined." Vanessa froze completely. Her perfectly white smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound confusion. A few question marks began popping up in the live comments on her phone screen. She let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, waving her hand dismissively at the camera. "Oh my goodness, you guys," Vanessa chuckled, her voice trembling slightly. "Jamal makes so many massive commercial real estate purchases that the bank probably triggered a random fraud alert. The security on these platinum accounts is just so strict. Let me just use a different card. It is no big deal at all." She reached back into her wallet with shaking fingers. She pulled out a sleek black card, the absolute highest tier of corporate credit available. She practically slammed it onto the marble counter. The sales associate picked it up with a cautious expression. She swiped the magnetic strip through the terminal. The machine processed the transaction. The silence in the boutique felt suffocating as Vanessa stared unblinking at the small digital screen. Beep. The red text flashed again. "Declined. Account frozen." The sales associate looked from the terminal screen directly into Vanessa's terrified eyes. The retail professional was no longer trying to hide her reaction. She looked at my sister with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "I am deeply sorry, madam," the cashier stated, her voice carrying an uncomfortable edge of sympathy. "The system is showing a hard error code. It says this specific account has been placed under a mandatory federal hold. I cannot process any transactions for you today." The live chat on Vanessa's phone absolutely exploded. The supportive heart emojis were instantly replaced by a torrential flood of digital mockery. Viewers began spamming the chat with laughing faces and images of trash cans. Comments rolled in faster than she could read them. People demanded to know if her hacker sister had actually won. They asked if Jamal was going to prison. They mocked her for trying to flex a $15,000 bag with a frozen bank account. The public humiliation was absolute and inescapable. Vanessa gasped in horror, reaching frantically for her smartphone to end the live broadcast. Her manicured fingers were trembling so violently that she fumbled the device. The phone slipped from her grasp and clattered against the marble counter, capturing a chaotic blur of the ceiling as the mocking comments continued to pour in. She finally managed to hit the end button, plunging her digital world into darkness. She stood there in the quiet boutique, completely stripped of her wealthy armor. Before Vanessa could even catch her breath or demand an explanation, her cell phone began vibrating aggressively against the marble counter. The caller identification displayed our mother, Patricia. Vanessa snatched the phone up, answering it immediately. She desperately hoped her mother was calling to offer a solution to this nightmare. Instead, a shrill, hysterical scream pierced through the phone's speaker. "Vanessa, you need to come home right now!" Patricia shrieked, her voice completely unrecognizable and wild with sheer panic. "It is your father. Everything is gone." "Mom, breathe," Vanessa pleaded, gripping the edge of the counter for physical support. "What is happening? Did the bank freeze Dad's accounts too? Did Audrey actually do something to the country club funds?" "It is not just the bank accounts," Patricia sobbed hysterically, her voice breaking into a guttural wail. "There are massive tow trucks pulling up our winding driveway right now. I thought they were lost, but they handed me a court order. They are not here for the cars, Vanessa. They brought heavy machinery. They are hooking up chains to your father's prized 50-foot private yacht." The loan company executed a margin call. "They are taking the boat. They are taking everything." Vanessa stood paralyzed in the luxury boutique, the $15,000 bag sitting entirely out of reach. The fake empire was dead. That realization had barely settled over my fractured family when my personal secure office line rang the following morning. The caller identification displayed my father's private cell phone number. Just 2 days ago, he had left a vicious, screaming voicemail threatening to lock me inside a psychiatric ward to invalidate my corporate leverage. Today, his approach was entirely different. I pressed the green button and answered with a single word. "Audrey." His voice crackled through the speaker, sounding ancient and entirely exhausted. His usual booming baritone was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic, trembling rasp. "I am calling to wave the white flag," my father said. "We need to stop this madness before there is nothing left of this family." I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, listening to his predictable pivot. Narcissists always change their tactics when brute force fails them. "What exactly do you want, Richard?" I asked, refusing to use the title of Dad. "I want my daughter back," he pleaded, deploying a forced emotional tremor that might have worked on me a decade ago. "Thanksgiving is tomorrow. I know we have said terrible things to each other. I know Jamal made massive mistakes." Richard continued, his voice dripping with calculated sorrow. "But we are blood, Audrey. Your mother is absolutely inconsolable, and Vanessa is a total wreck. Please let us put business aside for one day. We are family. Come home so we can heal." I stared out my high-rise office window at the sprawling Manhattan skyline. I knew with absolute certainty that this invitation was a carefully laid trap. Men like my father do not heal. They reload their weapons. They scheme in the shadows. They lay corporate ambushes under the guise of holiday peace. But an ambush only works if the prey walks in completely unarmed. I was holding a financial nuclear arsenal. "I will be there at 4 in the afternoon," I replied cleanly, and hung up the phone without waiting for his response. The drive to the Connecticut suburbs took exactly 2 hours. The familiar winding roads leading to my childhood home were lined with barren autumn trees and dead leaves. When my black Maybach pulled through the iron gates of the vast estate, the absence of my father's prized yacht from the side driveway was glaringly obvious. The empty space on the concrete driveway looked like a missing tooth in his perfect country club smile. I stepped out of the luxury vehicle wearing a razor-sharp charcoal designer suit paired with crimson stiletto heels. My hair was pulled back into a severe immaculate bun. I did not look anything like the scared 22-year-old girl they had thrown out into the freezing rain. I looked exactly like the ruthless chief executive officer who currently owned their crippling debt. I walked up the wide stone steps and pushed the heavy mahogany front door open. I entered the house without bothering to knock. The air inside the grand foyer was suffocatingly thick and uncomfortably silent. The usual warm, festive scents of roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, and cinnamon spices were completely absent. The massive house felt like a cold, sterile mausoleum. I walked straight down the hallway and into the formal dining room. The long, polished mahogany table was not set for a festive holiday feast. There were no crystal wine glasses, no silver platters, and absolutely no Thanksgiving turkey waiting to be carved. Instead, the dining room table looked like a corporate boardroom, prepared for a highly hostile negotiation. My mother, Patricia, sat at the far end of the room, gripping a glass of ice water with white knuckles. She glared at me with hollow, furious eyes but remained completely silent. Vanessa sat next to her, staring blindly at the wood grain, her face completely devoid of her usual heavy designer makeup. Jamal sat slumped in a corner chair, looking completely emasculated and avoiding my gaze entirely. The federal freeze on his operating accounts had clearly broken his arrogant spirit, but it was the three men sitting at the head of the long table that instantly confirmed my suspicions. My father, Richard, stood up wearing a stiff, dark business suit. Sitting directly to his right was Mr. Kensington, the cowardly family lawyer who had fled the courthouse just days prior. Sitting to his left was a man I recognized immediately from my extensive forensic audits. He was a shady private equity broker, known throughout the financial district for orchestrating highly unethical corporate bailouts for desperate executives facing imminent bankruptcy. I stopped at the edge of the table. "Have a seat, Audrey," my father commanded, gesturing rigidly to a lone wooden chair positioned directly across from their corporate firing squad. He was dropping the wounded father act completely. The manipulative invitation to heel was just cheap bait to get me inside the room. I remained standing, my arms resting loosely at my sides. "I see we are skipping the cranberry sauce this year." I noted, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. The shady broker flashed a slick, predatory smile. "I am here to facilitate a mutually beneficial solution," Miss Audrey, the broker, said. "Your father and I have structured a very lucrative buyout package." The broker continued, smoothing his expensive silk tie. "We are prepared to offer you a highly generous lump sum payment today. In exchange, we require a total reset of the current financial landscape." Mr. Kensington slid his leather briefcase open. His hands were still trembling slightly as he pulled out a thick stack of dense legal documents. He did not make eye contact with me as he pushed the heavy paperwork across the polished dining table. "These are comprehensive non-disclosure agreements," my father explained coldly. "Alongside them are the absolute trust relinquishment forms," my father added, his voice regaining a fraction of its old arrogant edge. "You sign these papers right now. You legally forfeit any and all claims to your grandfather's inheritance. You withdraw the federal complaints against Jamal's real estate fund. In return, you take the buyout money and you walk out of our lives forever." I looked down at the stack of restrictive legal contracts sitting exactly where a warm Thanksgiving dinner plate should have been. They really believed a shady broker could force me to surrender my absolute leverage. They thought they could buy their way out of a federal crime by sliding a few pieces of paper across a cold dining room table. The silence in the formal dining room was broken by the sound of crystal clinking against glass. My mother, Patricia, stood up from her chair at the far end of the long table. She smoothed down the front of her silk dress and picked up a bottle of red wine sitting near a centerpiece of artificial autumn leaves. She walked slowly toward my end of the table, her heels sinking into the imported carpet. Her face had completely transformed in 30 seconds. The furious glare she wore when I first walked through the front door had vanished. In its place was a sweet, maternal smile that made my skin crawl. It was the exact smile she used to charm wealthy donors at her exclusive charity galas. She poured a measure of dark red wine into an empty crystal goblet and pushed it gently toward the stack of legal documents sitting in front of me. She leaned in close, her heavy floral perfume masking the stale air of the silent room. She placed a manicured hand over my arm, attempting to project an illusion of genuine warmth. "Just sign this, darling Patricia," purred her voice, dripping with artificial affection. "Take the buyout money and sign the non-disclosure agreements. We can forgive your little corporate tantrum and go back to being a family. It is a holiday after all. We should be celebrating our blessings, not fighting over silly legal misunderstandings in a courtroom. Your father and I are willing to overlook the horrible stress you caused us this week. We just want our daughter back." I stared down at the dark red wine swirling slightly in the crystal goblet. The sheer delusion required to frame a massive federal wire fraud investigation as a little corporate tantrum was staggering. She honestly believed a glass of expensive wine and a fake maternal smile could erase 11 years of absolute abandonment and continuous psychological abuse. I did not touch the glass. I did not move my arm away from her hand. I simply let her desperate performance hang in the stagnant air of the dining room. Sensing my lack of compliance, Jamal decided it was his turn to take control of the negotiation. Despite the reality that his primary operating accounts were currently frozen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, his ego remained remarkably intact. He adjusted the lapels of his custom-tailored suit and leaned aggressively over the polished dining table. He planted his large hands firmly on the wood, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me the same way he did in the courthouse hallway. He stared at me with a condescending smirk, oblivious to the fact that he was dangling over a federal prison sentence. "Look," Audrey Jamal stated, his deep voice echoing with authority. "Let us be practical here. You managed to pull off a lucky stunt with your accounting firm. I admit it was a clever trick to freeze my accounts. But you and I both know you cannot sustain a legal war against a Manhattan real estate fund. The litigation costs alone will bankrupt whatever agency you are running. So I am going to do you a massive favor, because my wife wants her sister back. If you sign away your grandfather's trust today and withdraw the SEC complaint, I will give you a job as an HR manager at my firm. I will start you at a 6-figure salary with corporate benefits. It is a generous offer for someone without a degree. You can stop pretending to be a Wall Street executive and earn a legitimate living under my supervision." Vanessa nodded vigorously from her seat, her eyes lighting up at the prospect of having her estranged sister working as a subordinate employee under her powerful husband. She imagined the endless opportunities she would have to humiliate me in his corporate office. The shady private equity broker sitting next to Mr. Kensington let out a smooth, practiced chuckle. He tapped his expensive fountain pen against the legal documents. "I highly suggest you take the deal," Miss Audrey the broker added smoothly. "Your brother-in-law is offering you a highly lucrative career path, and your father has secured a generous lump sum payout to clear the slate. A smart businesswoman knows when to cash out and walk away. Take the pen, sign the relinquishment forms. Enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday with your loving family." The psychological pressure was intense. It was the exact bullying tactic my parents had used my entire childhood. They created an artificial reality where they were the generous saviors, and I was the troubled, ungrateful child who needed their strict guidance. I looked around the room, analyzing their expectant faces. Patricia was still smiling her fake maternal smile. Richard was watching me with a smug sense of renewed confidence. Jamal was puffing his chest out, believing his arrogant job offer had neutralized the threat I posed to his fraudulent empire. Vanessa was already reaching for her smartphone. I slowly reached my hand out toward the restrictive contracts. I picked up the gold fountain pen resting beside the documents. A collective silent sigh of relief swept through the formal dining room. My father physically relaxed in his chair, his rigid shoulders dropping. Patricia squeezed my arm affectionately, completely convinced her manipulative charm had worked. Jamal crossed his arms, looking immensely satisfied. I held the gold pen suspended perfectly still above the signature line. I did not write a letter. I slowly lifted my head and locked my eyes onto my father's arrogant face. The fake smile on Patricia's lips instantly faltered. "I have a quick question before I sign these documents," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm volume. "Dad." I continued, keeping my gaze fixed entirely on him. "That $5 million loan you took out to remodel this suburban mansion 2 years ago, did you ever look up the parent company of the private lender?" Richard let out a loud, arrogant scoff that broke the heavy silence in the dining room. He leaned back in his expensive chair, looking completely unbothered by my sudden question about his finances. "Oakmont Financial," Richard stated proudly, his chest puffing out beneath his tailored suit. "They are a highly respected private wealth firm in this city. They handle lending for the most elite corporate executives in the area. I secured that $5 million loan based on my pristine credit history alone. I hardly see how my personal real estate financing has anything to do with your grandfather or the ridiculous corporate tantrum you threw at the courthouse today. Why do you ask?" I did not answer him immediately. I twirled the gold fountain pen, letting the metal catch the warm light. I watched his smug expression hold steady, while Patricia smiled encouragingly beside him. Jamal crossed his arms, waiting for me to sign the paperwork that would save him from prison. They were completely blind to the execution I had prepared. I placed the pen on the table, pushing it away from the documents. I looked into my father's arrogant eyes. "Oakmont Financial is a subsidiary of Apex Forensic Ventures," I said, my voice carrying a lethal and absolute calm. "They are a boutique lending branch we acquired to manage luxury collateral. Oakmont Financial is mine." The transformation in the room was violent and instantaneous. Richard took a large gulp of red wine as my words registered. The liquid caught in his throat. He choked violently, coughing and sputtering as dark red wine spilled down his white shirt. He grabbed his napkin, gasping for air while his eyes bulged in terror. Patricia shrieked, reaching to pat his back, but her face drained of color, her fake maternal smile completely shattered, leaving behind a mask of absolute horror. Jamal dropped his arms, his jaw hanging open as he realized my financial reach. If I owned the mortgage bank, they were not fighting a corporate auditor anymore. They were fighting the person who literally owned the roof over their heads. But the most dramatic reaction came from Mr. Kensington. The family lawyer instantly understood the devastating trap they had blindly walked into. If I was the primary lien holder on the property, any attempt to coerce me into signing a non-disclosure agreement or relinquishing my grandfather's trust under the threat of blackmail would be considered criminal extortion against a secured creditor. Kensington lunged across the dining table, his suit knocking over a water glass. He frantically snatched the stack of non-disclosure agreements and trust relinquishment forms away from me, hugging the paperwork to his chest like a shield. He looked at my father with wide, panicked eyes. "Richard, you never disclosed this conflict of interest to me," Kensington stammered, his professional demeanor completely destroyed. "You told me the property was leveraged through an independent third-party lender. If she owns the debt, holding these settlement documents in front of her is a direct violation of federal lending interference laws. We cannot offer her a job or a buyout to drop an active Securities and Exchange Commission investigation when she holds the deed to your primary residence. That is textbook extortion. I am withdrawing as your legal counsel immediately." The shady private equity broker sitting next to Kensington slowly pushed his chair back from the table. He stood up without saying a single word, grabbing his briefcase and walking swiftly out of the dining room. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. Richard finally stopped coughing, his face a deep shade of crimson. He slammed his fist onto the table, trying desperately to regain control of a situation that had already spiraled into complete catastrophe. "That is impossible," Richard croaked, his voice raw and shaking. "I have made my monthly payments to Oakmont Financial for 2 years. I am in perfect standing. You cannot touch this house. You have no legal grounds to threaten my property." I stood up from my chair, smoothing out the front of my tailored blazer. I looked into my father's arrogant eyes. "You diverted funds," Richard Verse stated coldly. "When Jamal needed cash to cover his failing commercial real estate margins, you routed your last 3 mortgage payments into his offshore shell companies to help him avoid a federal audit. You thought Oakmont Financial would give a respected country club member a grace period. You thought a slight delay in your luxury mortgage payments would go completely unnoticed by the banking executives. But I notice everything." I continued, unbuttoning my blazer. "I monitor every single defaulted loan that passes through my subsidiaries. When your name flagged in my system last month, I personally oversaw the audit of your entire holding company. You breached the terms of your luxury mortgage agreement the exact moment you redirected those funds to mask Jamal's wire fraud. Earlier that afternoon, my mother had ordered a massive catered feast, attempting to recreate the holiday warmth they had long since destroyed. A massive roasted turkey sat untouched on an extravagant silver platter in the very center of the long mahogany table, surrounded by artificial autumn leaves and pristine crystal glasses. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a thick legal packet bound by a rubber band. The papers were stamped with the official seal of the State Financial Regulatory Board. I did not hand the documents to my father. I did not hand them to the terrified lawyer. I tossed the thick legal packet directly onto the roasted turkey in the center of the table. The heavy bundle of papers landed with a wet, sickening thud, splattering gravy and grease across the pristine white tablecloth. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with manicured hands. "You missed 3 payments, Richard," I announced, echoing through the dead silence of the ruined dining room. "This is your official notice of foreclosure and eviction." The heavy legal packet sat directly on top of the roasted turkey, soaking up grease and hot gravy in this beautiful mansion. For a fraction of a second, the dining room was completely dead and silent. Then absolute chaos erupted. Patricia let out a shrill, ear-piercing scream that echoed off the high ceiling. The carefully constructed mask of a wealthy suburban socialite violently ripped apart. She grabbed her crystal wine glass and hurled it across the room. The delicate glass shattered loudly against the expensive wallpaper, sending a spray of dark red wine dripping down the floral patterns like fresh blood. She was hyperventilating and clutching her pearl necklace as she stared at the foreclosure notice, ruining her perfect holiday centerpiece. Vanessa sat frozen in her expensive chair, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The smug arrogance she had paraded around the courtroom was entirely gone. Real tears began to stream down her pale face, ruining her designer makeup. The horrific reality of her bleak situation was finally crashing down on her shoulders. Her luxury cars, her exotic vacations, her designer handbags, and the roof over her head were all financed by massive mountains of corporate debt. She just realized that her estranged older sister owned every single penny of it. The lavish lifestyle Vanessa constantly flaunted on social media was a complete fabrication, and I held the absolute power to repossess her entire existence today. She covered her face with her trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably into the quiet room. Jamal could not handle the suffocating reality of his own absolute defeat. His fragile ego shattered completely under the crushing weight of my financial dominance. He kicked his heavy wooden chair backward, sending it crashing into the antique credenza behind him. He stood up, his massive frame shaking with unadulterated rage and pure panic. He stomped loudly around the edge of the long mahogany table and quickly closed the distance between us. He loomed over me, using his broad shoulders and tall stature to project a desperate aura of physical intimidation. The thick veins in his neck visibly bulged against his tight silk collar. "You are a monster," Jamal yelled, his deep voice vibrating with absolute fury. You come into this house on a holiday and wave your corporate leverage around like a weapon. You are destroying your own blood. You are ripping your own family apart just to stroke your pathetic ego. You think you are a genius, but you are just a vicious sociopath trying to punish us for moving on without you. I did not flinch once. I did not take a single step back from his towering figure. I looked up into his desperate, furious eyes with a completely calm and steady gaze. My heart rate did not elevate. My breathing remained perfectly even and slow. I had successfully faced down ruthless Wall Street billionaires and highly corrupt banking executives. A panicked real estate fraudster throwing a temper tantrum in a dining room meant absolutely nothing to me. It was over. I am not destroying this family, Jamal, I stated, my voice cutting through his loud shouting with lethal precision. You destroyed yourselves when you kicked a 22-year-old girl out into the freezing street with nothing but a small suitcase. You threw me away like garbage because I refused to sign my name onto your illegal tax fraud schemes. You desperately wanted a perfect scapegoat to cover your massive financial crimes, and you chose me. You built your entire fake empire on the money you stole from my grandfather and the fraudulent loans you took from my banks. I am simply the consequence of your own catastrophic greed. I am not the villain in your story, Jamal. I am the auditor today. Jamal opened his mouth to scream another vicious insult, but no words came out. The absolute truth of my statement completely neutralized his aggressive posturing. He knew I was entirely right. Richard sat paralyzed in his chair, unable to defend his son-in-law. Patricia continued to sob quietly into her shaking hands. The pristine illusion of the wealthy, untouchable family was officially dead and buried under a pile of legal foreclosure documents. I turned my back on the pathetic scene unfolding behind me. I did not need to hear another desperate excuse or endure another fake apology today. The execution was complete. I walked calmly out of the ruined dining room, my high heels clicking steadily against the polished hardwood floor. I crossed the grand foyer and pushed the heavy front doors open, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. I climbed into the back seat of my waiting luxury car and instructed the driver to take me back to Manhattan. I left them entirely alone to deal with the terrifying reality of their imminent eviction. Back inside the silent dining room, the remaining family members stared blindly at the grease-stained foreclosure notice. The harsh reality of losing their mansion, their businesses, and their elite social status completely paralyzed them. But Jamal was currently driven by a sheer toxic cocktail of desperate survival and deeply bruised pride. He could not accept that a woman he considered a massive failure had completely outsmarted him. His breathing was heavy and extremely ragged. He turned his wild, panicked eyes toward Mr. Kensington, who was still frantically packing his legal briefcase to escape the doomed house. Jamal grabbed the cowardly lawyer by the shoulder, violently stopping him in his tracks. "Listen to me," Jamal growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous conspiratorial whisper. "I do not care what it takes, or how many federal laws we have to break tonight. I refuse to let that dropout take my buildings and my money. I have powerful friends in offshore banking. I know digital hackers who can bypass federal security protocols. I am going to drain her corporate accounts before she can take my buildings. I will completely bankrupt her entire company tonight." Mr. Kensington ripped his shoulder away from Jamal's tight grip and sprinted for the front door without looking back. He knew better than to stick around when a desperate man started confessing to premeditated cybercrimes. Jamal did not care that his cowardly lawyer had abandoned him in his darkest hour. His massive ego was completely consumed by a singular frantic goal of financial survival. He stormed out of the ruined dining room, leaving Richard and Patricia staring blankly at the grease-stained foreclosure notice sitting on their dining table. Jamal locked himself securely inside Richard's mahogany-paneled home office and immediately opened his encrypted laptop. He quickly accessed a secure dark web communication portal he had not used in over 3 years. This was the exact same untraceable portal he had previously utilized to hire an elite international financial hacker. That specific hacker had helped Jamal successfully hide millions of dollars from the Internal Revenue Service when his real estate fund first started showing highly toxic debt. Jamal aggressively typed out a frantic message offering triple the hacker's usual exorbitant fee for a priority emergency job. He needed to penetrate the main operating accounts of Apex Forensic Ventures, and he needed to do it immediately before his own impending arrest. He wired a non-refundable cryptocurrency deposit to ensure the hacker prioritized this destructive assignment. He was willing to risk federal incarceration to prove he was still the smartest man in the room. Over the next 3 days, an eerie and suffocating silence fell over the grand suburban mansion. There were no aggressive phone calls from my corporate lawyers demanding immediate surrender. There were no sudden police raids executed in the middle of the night. The local sheriff's department did not show up to aggressively enforce the formal eviction notice I had dropped on their holiday turkey. I completely vanished from their radar, withdrawing into the untouchable glass fortress of my Manhattan headquarters. I deliberately cut off all communication channels, leaving my entire family to sit and stew in their own mounting psychological paranoia. But highly arrogant men rarely understand the brilliant strategic value of absolute silence. They mistake patience for hesitation. Richard and Jamal spent those 72 hours pacing the expansive hallways, desperately convincing themselves that my sudden lack of aggression meant I was terrified of the potential public backlash. They built a highly delusional narrative that my dramatic Thanksgiving appearance was nothing more than an elaborate theatrical bluff designed to scare them. Richard poured himself generous glasses of expensive aged scotch, loudly declaring that my company must be facing severe internal compliance issues and crippling legal restrictions. He boasted to Patricia that my corporate board of directors had probably restrained me from pursuing illegal foreclosure tactics against my own blood relatives to protect the firm. Jamal fed eagerly on that false confidence. He stopped his frantic pacing and started smiling again. He believed his intimidating presence had forced me to back down. On the third night, the elite dark web hacker finally bypassed the outer security perimeter of my corporate network. Jamal sat illuminated by the cold blue light of the laptop screen inside Richard's quiet office. His heart pounded heavily against his ribs with a toxic mixture of adrenaline and pure unregulated greed. The hacker sent him a secure encrypted message confirming they had successfully located a specific vulnerability in the offshore routing system of Apex Forensic Ventures. It was a seemingly weak firewall guarding the highly sensitive international wire transfer protocol. Jamal did not pause for a single second to question why a multi-billion-dollar forensic accounting firm would have such a glaring amateur security flaw in their primary routing architecture. His immense unearned arrogance completely blinded him to the obvious terrifying reality that he was walking directly into a digital slaughterhouse. He aggressively instructed the hacker to exploit the vulnerability immediately and siphon the available capital. Jamal typed in the complex routing numbers for an anonymous offshore dummy account he had secretly established in the Bahamas years ago to avoid domestic capital gains taxes. He sat gripping the edge of the mahogany desk as he watched the progress bar on the encrypted terminal slowly fill with bright green light. The compromised system was actively bypassing the standard domestic regulatory checks and seamlessly pushing the fraudulent transaction right through the unrestricted international financial corridor. He was moving millions of dollars in untraceable digital currency right under my nose without setting off a single internal alarm. He felt like an absolute god of finance again. The thrill of stealing from the very woman who had humiliated him was an intoxicating high he could not resist. He watched the numbers climb higher and higher, draining my corporate liquidity with every passing second. The final confirmation screen flashed brightly across the laptop display, indicating a highly successful international wire transfer had been fully completed and verified. Jamal slammed his fist down onto the mahogany desk in absolute sheer triumph. He let out a loud, victorious shout that echoed loudly through the quiet, empty mansion. He aggressively grabbed the laptop and sprinted upstairs to the master bedroom where Vanessa was frantically packing designer clothes into her luxury suitcases, preparing for their inevitable, disgraceful eviction. He kicked the heavy bedroom door open and shoved the glowing screen directly into her face. The digital receipt showed a confirmed clear balance of exactly $10 million, resting safely in their hidden Bahamian account, completely out of the legal reach of the United States government. Vanessa gasped loudly, dropping a delicate silk blouse onto the hardwood floor. Her tear-stained face instantly transformed into a look of greedy, sheer disbelief. Jamal wrapped his large, muscular arm tightly around her waist, pulling her close as he pointed triumphantly at the massive numerical balance on the screen. "I told you that dropout could not beat me!" Jamal cheered, his deep voice vibrating with absolute manic victory. "She is completely out of her league. I just took $10 million from her operating fund. We are leaving the country tonight." 40 stories beneath the bustling streets of Manhattan, the atmosphere inside the secure data center of Apex Forensic Ventures was entirely different from the frantic celebration happening at my father's suburban mansion. The subterranean facility was a sprawling fortress of cold steel and reinforced glass. Rows of massive black server racks hummed with intense electrical power, processing millions of financial transactions every single second. The room was illuminated only by the sharp blue glow of dozens of oversized digital monitors. I stood perfectly still in the center of the command floor, wearing a tailored black suit with my arms folded tightly across my chest. I stared intently at the enormous digital map dominating the primary viewing wall. The map displayed a complex global web of real-time banking networks, tracing the constant flow of international capital. My lead cybersecurity engineer, Carter, sat stationed at the primary control terminal directly in front of the massive screen. Carter was a brilliant digital architect who had spent the last 5 years building impenetrable financial firewalls for my company. He tapped rapidly on his backlit keyboard, monitoring the secure perimeter of our offshore holding accounts. The data center was quiet except for the continuous low hum of the cooling fans and the rapid clicking of Carter's keys. We had been waiting in this sterile underground room for 3 solid days. I knew Jamal possessed the kind of reckless, arrogant desperation that inevitably leads to catastrophic mistakes. I knew he would eventually seek out illicit dark web contractors to bypass his frozen domestic funds. I just needed to be exceedingly patient and wait for him to spring the trap. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing alarm echoed through the quiet data center. A bright red warning notification flashed violently across the center of the massive digital map. The blue lines connecting our domestic servers to our offshore banking nodes instantly turned a glaring shade of crimson. Carter leaned forward abruptly, his fingers flying across the terminal as he traced the origin of the sudden digital intrusion. The red line on the map pulsed aggressively, stretching from a localized internet protocol address in Connecticut directly toward a simulated vulnerability in our Caribbean holding accounts. "We have a breach," Carter announced, his voice tight with sudden adrenaline. "Someone is actively bypassing the outer security perimeter of the offshore routing system. The unauthorized access point is tracing straight back to the residential network at your father's estate. The hostile user is utilizing a highly sophisticated dark web protocol to mask their digital footprint, but they are pushing through the designated access corridor right now." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my eyes locked completely on the pulsing red line stretching across the global map. The digital thief was moving fast. Within seconds, another loud alarm blared from the primary terminal. The numbers on the screen began shifting rapidly. The hostile user had successfully initiated a massive, unauthorized capital transfer. They were aggressively siphoning funds from our simulated operating account and pushing the stolen money straight toward an anonymous offshore dummy account located in the Bahamas. "The transfer request is set for exactly $10 million. Carter shouted, his professional composure cracking under the sheer magnitude of the brazen corporate theft. "They are establishing a direct encrypted tunnel to route the capital right past the domestic regulatory checks. The transaction is currently processing through the final verification stage. If they complete this unauthorized wire transfer, the capital will be entirely gone." Carter spun around in his ergonomic chair, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. He placed his hands hovering directly over the emergency kill switch on his keyboard. He fully believed we were bleeding millions of dollars in real time. He thought my arrogant brother-in-law had actually managed to outsmart our elite security infrastructure and successfully rob the firm. "Give me the authorization to block the transfer right now," Carter pleaded, his voice laced with absolute panic. "I can sever the digital port immediately and kill their connection before the capital leaves the domestic server. I can lock them out and freeze the stolen funds. Just say the word, and I will drop the firewall right on top of them." I slowly walked over to the primary control terminal. I reached out and gently placed my hand directly over Carter's, trembling fingers physically stopping him from touching the emergency kill switch. I looked down at my panicked lead engineer and smiled coldly. The calm, predatory expression on my face completely contrasted the frantic flashing red alarms illuminating the dark room. "No," I commanded, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any panic. "Let him take it. Do not touch a single key on that terminal, Carter. Let the digital transaction process completely through the system. I want him to successfully steal every single penny of that $10 million. Carter stared at me in profound confusion. "But he is breaching our holding accounts," Carter protested weakly, removing his hands from the keyboard. "He just compromised our offshore routing vulnerability. That specific server is not a vulnerability." I explained, my cold smile widening as I looked back up at the massive digital map. "It is a honeypot." The bright red line on the screen flashed one final time, indicating the $10 million wire transfer was officially complete. The stolen capital had successfully landed in Jamal's hidden Bahamian account. I let out a slow, satisfied breath. My arrogant brother-in-law honestly believed he had just pulled off the ultimate digital heist. He thought he had outsmarted the system and secured his luxurious escape from the country. He was entirely oblivious to the lethal reality of the digital architecture he had just recklessly violated. I turned my attention back to my shocked engineering team. "I built that specific decoy server months ago," I explained calmly to the silent room. "It was not just an isolated Apex holding account. That server was a dedicated tracking node jointly monitored by federal financial authorities to trace illicit offshore money laundering syndicates. I intentionally left that specific access corridor exposed, knowing a desperate, arrogant criminal would eventually try to exploit it. By purposely bypassing that exact firewall and executing the unauthorized wire transfer, Jamal did not just steal $10 million in corporate money. He sliced directly through a live federal tripwire. He bypassed a heavily monitored government node and funneled stolen capital into an illegal offshore tax haven. He just committed direct, indisputable wire fraud across state and international lines. The FBI is already tracking his digital fingerprints. The trap is officially closed." Back at the sprawling suburban mansion, Jamal marched confidently down the grand staircase. The suffocating dread that had crushed him for 3 days was completely gone. He strode purposefully toward Richard's mahogany-paneled study. He found my father sitting behind his massive desk, staring blankly at the wall with a half-empty glass of scotch in his trembling hand. Richard looked like a defeated, broken old man. Jamal walked right in and poured himself a generous measure of the premium liquor. He raised the crystal glass in the air, flashing an arrogant smile. "You can stop worrying about your pathetic daughter," Jamal announced, his deep voice booming with triumphant energy. "I just completely neutralized the Audrey problem." Richard blinked, his bloodshot eyes widening in desperate hope. He sat up straight, gripping the armrests. "What do you mean you neutralized her?" Richard demanded. "Did she drop the foreclosure?" Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh and took a slow, confident sip of his drink. "She did not agree to anything," Jamal boasted, leaning against the mahogany desk. "I hired a top-tier digital contractor to penetrate her offshore corporate networks. I bypassed her firewalls and drained $10 million straight out of her primary operating fund. She is bleeding capital right now. Without that liquidity, she cannot legally finalize the foreclosure on this house. or sustain the federal audit against my real estate portfolio. I beat her, Richard. I just bankrupted her entire operation. The transformation in my father was instantaneous. The exhausted, terrified old man vanished entirely. Richard slammed his fist down on the desk in pure, unadulterated victory. The color rushed rapidly back into his aging face. He let out a sharp, barking laugh of sheer relief. I knew she was nothing but a fragile amateur, Richard cheered, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. She lacks the absolute ruthless instinct required to survive at our level. You broke her, Jamal. Patricia hurried into the study, drawn by the sudden loud commotion. What is going on? She asked, clutching her pearl necklace tightly. Richard wrapped his arms around his wife, grinning like a predator. Jamal saved us, Patricia, my father declared proudly. He outsmarted Audrey and secured our financial future. We are keeping the house and Jamal's business is safe. The nightmare is officially over. Patricia's face completely lit up. She let out a dramatic gasp, covering her mouth before rushing over to hug her son-in-law. Oh, Jamal, you absolute genius, Patricia praised him, her voice singing with elite suburban elitism. She immediately pulled away, her mind shifting from financial ruin straight back to her social calendar. Richard, Patricia gasped, her eyes shining with manic excitement. We have to proceed with the 35th wedding anniversary gala this Saturday. We cannot cancel it now. Richard nodded vigorously, completely agreeing with his wife's narcissistic priorities. You are absolutely right, Patricia, he stated, adjusting his expensive tie. My country club investors have been breathing down my neck because of Vanessa's disastrous live stream. They think we are bleeding money and facing federal indictments. We need to show high society that the Blackwell family is still completely untouchable. A lavish 5-star celebration is the exact perfect counter-narrative to Audrey's desperate corporate tantrum. Over the next 48 hours, the mansion transformed back into a hub of frantic elite preparation. Vanessa and Patricia behaved as if the terrifying foreclosure notice had never even existed. They spent hours coordinating with luxury event planners, securing premium catering, and arranging extravagant floral displays for the grand ballroom of the most expensive hotel in the city. They ignored the harsh reality that their regular credit cards were still restricted by my initial asset freezes. Jamal simply assured them he could wire the stolen Bahamian funds to cover any temporary shortages. On Saturday afternoon, Patricia stood in front of her gilded vanity mirror. She wore a stunning custom emerald green evening gown, dripping in expensive diamonds. She took a perfectly angled selfie, making sure the opulent background was clearly visible. She opened her social media accounts and posted the photograph to her wealthy followers. She typed out a highly calculated caption designed to passively aggressively mock my existence. The storm has passed, Patricia wrote, adding a sparkling champagne emoji. True family wealth always prevails against jealous, bitter outsiders. Looking forward to celebrating 35 years of unbreakable love tonight. The grand ballroom of the 5-star hotel was a masterpiece of extravagant wealth and superficiality. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the crowded room. Dozens of round tables were draped in crisp white silk linens and decorated with towering centerpieces of imported orchids. The guest list was a meticulously curated collection of the most powerful people in the city. Local politicians, wealthy real estate moguls, and high-profile corporate executives all mingled together in their finest black tie attire. They clinked expensive crystal glasses and laughed loudly, oblivious to the catastrophic criminal reality hiding beneath the beautiful festive surface. Waiters in sharp black tuxedos circulated seamlessly through the wealthy crowd, carrying polished silver trays loaded with premium champagne flutes and delicate caviar appetizers. Patricia gracefully floated through the ballroom, warmly greeting her elite socialite friends and accepting their lavish compliments. She laughed brightly, dismissing any subtle inquiries about the recent internet rumors as mere jealous gossip. Richard stood near the private bar, surrounded by his corporate investors, projecting an aura of absolute financial invincibility. He clapped his powerful colleagues on the back, boasting loudly about his upcoming commercial acquisitions. Jamal and Vanessa held court near the center of the room, soaking in the endless validation from their peers. Jamal held a glass of expensive scotch, grinning arrogantly. The gala began with premium champagne flowing freely and a live string orchestra playing flawlessly. They were projecting the perfect illusion of an untouchable billionaire family right before the inevitable brutal federal slaughter finally ripped their arrogant world apart. The opulent grand ballroom of the five-star hotel was absolutely packed to maximum capacity, with the most influential political figures and wealthy real estate moguls in the entire city. The room smelled of expensive imported perfumes and the rich aroma of roasted duck being served on silver platters by impeccably dressed waiters. It was a flawless display of high society elitism designed to permanently erase any lingering whispers of financial ruin or domestic scandal. My family had successfully gathered the absolute pinnacle of the elite social circle to witness their fabricated victory and validate their stolen wealth. Standing near a towering ice sculpture in the center of the lavish room was Mr. Kensington. The cowardly family lawyer had miraculously found his courage again the exact moment Jamal informed him about the stolen $10 million resting safely in the Bahamian offshore account. Kensington held a crystal glass of top-shelf bourbon in his right hand, gesturing animatedly as he held court with a group of highly influential private equity investors. He puffed out his chest and arrogantly bragged about his supposed legal brilliance. He spun a ridiculous fictional narrative about how he had crushed my legal leverage using obscure defense mechanisms. The wealthy investors nodded, completely unaware that the man they were praising was actively complicit in a massive federal wire fraud conspiracy. At the far end of the grand ballroom, my mother Patricia glided gracefully between the silk-draped tables. She wore her custom emerald green gown like royal armor, accepting endless streams of validation from her elite peers. She laughed brightly, projecting the perfect image of a devoted matriarch celebrating 35 years of unbroken marital bliss. Richard stood by her side, playing the role of the stoic, untouchable billionaire patriarch. He firmly shook hands with local politicians and casually dismissed the recent internet rumors as nothing more than the pathetic, desperate actions of a deeply troubled, estranged daughter. They were entirely consumed by their own magnificent delusions of grandeur. As the evening progressed toward its peak, the live string orchestra transitioned into a soft, classical melody. Jamal decided it was the perfect moment to assert his dominance and solidify his position as the brilliant savior of the family empire. He stepped away from Vanessa and walked directly toward the raised stage. He wore a stunning custom black tuxedo. He carried a fresh flute of champagne and signaled to activate the main microphone. He tapped a silver spoon gently against the side of his crystal glass. The sharp ringing sound echoed clearly through the massive room, cutting through wealthy chatter. The elite guests slowly turned their attention toward the stage, falling into a polite and respectful silence. Jamal stood under the bright spotlight, radiating absolute unearned arrogance. He looked out over the sea of wealthy politicians and powerful executives, feeling like an invincible king who had just conquered the financial world. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jamal began, his deep, resonant voice filling the grand ballroom with absolute false confidence. "We are gathered here to celebrate 35 incredible years of marriage between Richard and Patricia. They have built an extraordinary legacy of love and success that inspires all of us. But tonight is also a celebration of the unbreakable bond that holds this family together. It is a testament to our absolute resilience in the face of sudden, unexpected adversity." Jamal took a slow, arrogant sip of his champagne, letting the dramatic pause build anticipation among the captive audience. He locked eyes with my sister Vanessa, who stood near the front row glowing with manufactured pride. "I want to take a special moment to recognize my beautiful and incredibly strong wife, Vanessa," Jamal continued, projecting his voice perfectly. "She is the absolute rock of this family. Recently, we found ourselves targeted by a deeply malicious and entirely fabricated smear campaign. We were attacked by a jealous, bitter outsider who desperately wanted to destroy everything we have worked so hard to build. This unstable individual tried to use cheap corporate parlor tricks and digital harassment to bring us down. They thought they could break our spirit and steal our joy. Jamal let out a loud, booming laugh that rolled across the silent ballroom. He shook his head in mock pity. But let me tell you a fundamental truth about the real world, Jamal declared, raising his champagne glass higher into the bright spotlight. The haters and the bitter outsiders will always fail. They will always lose because they lack the intelligence and the relentless drive required to succeed at this elite level. They can try their pathetic little cyber attacks and their desperate legal threats, but true financial genius and unbreakable family unity will always prevail. We completely outsmarted the enemy. We secured our permanent legacy. We won. The wealthy crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Richard and Patricia beamed with absolute narcissistic pride, raising their own crystal glasses in a triumphant salute to their arrogant son-in-law. Vanessa wiped a fake tear from her eye, soaking in the validation from the elite audience. It was the absolute pinnacle of their fabricated reality. They had successfully convinced the entire city that they were the brilliant, untouchable victims who had heroically defeated a jealous villain. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom suddenly burst open with a deafening, violent crash. The solid wood slammed brutally against the marble walls, instantly shattering the joyful atmosphere. The live string orchestra abruptly stopped playing mid-note. The enthusiastic applause died instantly, completely replaced by a wave of sudden, terrified gasps. The hundreds of elite guests turned around in utter shock, expecting to see me walking through the entrance to ruin their perfect celebration. It was not me. Marching aggressively through the shattered entrance was a dozen federal agents. They moved with absolute terrifying precision. They wore tactical dark windbreakers, with bright yellow letters printed boldly across their chests and backs. The letters read, FBI. Panic immediately swept through the grand ballroom like a violent tidal wave. The deafening crash of the heavy oak doors permanently shattered the delicate illusion of high society elegance. Politicians who had just been sipping premium champagne scrambled backward, spilling expensive alcohol over their tailored suits. Wealthy real estate moguls grabbed their wives and retreated toward the far walls, trying desperately to distance themselves from the catastrophic scene unfolding in the center of the room. Nobody wanted their pristine reputation associated with an active criminal investigation. The live string orchestra had completely abandoned their instruments, retreating behind the heavy velvet curtains in sheer terror. The lavish 35th anniversary gala had instantly transformed into a chaotic crime scene. A dozen heavily armed federal agents marched efficiently down the center aisle. Their tactical boots stomped against the imported silk carpets, leaving deep impressions. They did not look at the screaming socialites or the panicked billionaires. Their eyes were locked entirely on the elevated stage. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man, walked directly toward the spotlight. He did not bother lowering his voice to preserve the dignity of the wealthy hosts. He wanted the entire room to hear exactly why the federal government crashed the most exclusive party of the year. Jamal stood completely frozen on the stage. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling hand and shattered against the wooden floorboards. The microphone he was just using to boast about his financial genius let out a sharp, piercing feedback noise before hitting the ground. His arrogant posture collapsed entirely. The powerful real estate fund manager, who had just been bragging about defeating his enemies, looked like a terrified child trapped in blinding headlights. The lead federal agent reached the edge of the stage and looked up at Jamal with undisguised contempt. He did not ask for a private meeting in a back room. He did not offer any professional courtesy. Jamal, the lead agent, barked, his voice booming across the silent, terrified ballroom. You are under arrest for massive federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and severe violations of Securities and Exchange Commission regulations. We have perfectly documented evidence of your unauthorized $10 million transfer into an illegal offshore Bahamian account. You triggered a monitored federal node and we have traced every single fraudulent digital footprint directly back to your personal devices. The harsh reality of his situation finally pierced through Jamal's massive ego. The delusion that he had outsmarted a brilliant forensic auditor evaporated completely. He realized he had been played perfectly. He had stolen the bait and locked himself inside a federal prison cell. Pure adrenaline and raw animal panic suddenly took over Jamal's brain. He looked at the federal agents swarming the stage and made the absolute worst decision possible. He decided to run. Jamal spun around and sprinted toward the back edge of the elevated platform, intending to escape through the service corridors behind the velvet drapery. He did not even make it 3 steps. 2 heavily armored federal agents vaulted onto the stage with terrifying speed. They tackled Jamal violently from behind. The brutal impact sent all 3 men crashing hard onto the polished wooden floorboards. Jamal's expensive custom black tuxedo ripped audibly across the shoulder seams. He thrashed wildly against the agents, trying desperately to break free from their iron grip. "Stop resisting," the agents shouted, pinning his broad shoulders firmly against the stage floor. They wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists was the most definitive sound in the entire room. The brilliant self-made real estate genius was reduced to a struggling, helpless criminal, pinned face down in front of the exact same elite peers he had just been trying to impress. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream from the front row. She lunged forward, trying to reach her husband, but a female federal agent immediately intercepted her, pushing her firmly back into the crowd. Patricia stood paralyzed near the ice sculpture, her hands covering her face in sheer horror. Her perfect emerald green gown felt like a cruel joke now. The elite socialites she had spent decades trying to impress were currently pulling out their smartphones to record the humiliating spectacle of her son-in-law being arrested for federal fraud. Richard looked completely physically sick, grabbing the edge of a linen-draped table to keep himself from collapsing. While the entire ballroom was completely fixated on the chaotic arrest happening on the main stage, the cowardly family lawyer saw his final opportunity. Mr. Kensington knew exactly what the federal wire fraud charges meant. His own fingerprints were all over the fraudulent trust documents and non-disclosure agreements he had attempted to force upon his client's daughter during that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. His prestigious legal career was effectively dead, but he wanted to avoid a federal prison sentence. Kensington quietly abandoned his crystal glass on a passing waiter's tray. He ducked his head down and began weaving silently through the panicked crowd. He moved quickly toward the heavy brass doors leading into the hotel kitchen area, hoping to slip out through the service alleyway. He pushed the swinging door open and stepped into the dimly lit corridor, feeling a sudden rush of desperate hope. He thought he had successfully escaped the slaughter. He was entirely wrong. A massive federal agent stepped directly out of the shadows, completely blocking the narrow exit path. The agent crossed his muscular arms over his tactical windbreaker and glared down at the terrified attorney. Kensington froze in his tracks, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. He tried to turn around and run back into the ballroom, but a second agent stepped up behind him, cutting off his only retreat. The lead agent from the stage walked slowly into the corridor, holding a thick stack of printed legal warrants. "We have a specific warrant for you too, Mr. Kensington," the agent stated, his voice dripping with professional disgust. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit massive document fraud and illegal extortion regarding the grandfather trust. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The lawyer whimpered as handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. He was shoved roughly against the wall, stripped of his pretentious dignity. Back inside the grand ballroom, the situation had escalated into absolute pandemonium. Vanessa was screaming, her vocal cords straining as she sprinted toward the elevated stage. She threw herself recklessly at the heavily armored federal agents who were hauling her disgraced husband up from the floorboards. She clawed frantically at their windbreakers, trying desperately to pull them off Jamal. Her designer gown tore at the seams, and her diamond jewelry caught the harsh lighting as she thrashed like a wild animal cornered by predators. "Let him go!" Vanessa shrieked, her face distorted with rage and terror. "He is a respected fund manager. You cannot treat us like this. We are wealthy. We have elite lawyers." A female agent stepped forward efficiently, intercepting my hysterical sister. The agent grabbed Vanessa by the shoulders and pushed her back, establishing a rigid physical boundary. "Mom, step back immediately, or you will be arrested for assaulting a federal officer," the agent warned, her voice leaving no room for negotiation or entitlement. Vanessa stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the hem of her ruined dress. She collapsed onto the polished floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the illusion of her perfect billionaire lifestyle evaporated into thin air. A few feet away, Patricia was hyperventilating so violently she had to lean heavily against a draped table to keep from passing out. Her chest heaved as she stared wildly at the hundreds of elite socialites surrounding her. These were the exact same powerful politicians and real estate moguls she had spent 3 decades meticulously courting. Now those very same people were stepping away from her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Several of her closest friends were actively recording the humiliating spectacle on their smartphones, documenting the catastrophic downfall of the Blackwell family. Patricia's social life was permanently destroyed in a matter of seconds. The elite circles of high society do not forgive public federal raids. Richard, however, stubbornly refused to accept his sudden loss of power. His arrogant ego compelled him to fight a battle he had already lost entirely. He stormed aggressively toward the lead FBI agent, pulling out his cell phone with shaking hands. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Richard bellowed. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am personal friends with the governor of this state. I fund his re-election campaigns. I demand to make a phone call right now. I will have your squad fired and stripped of your pensions by tomorrow morning." The lead agent did not even blink at the empty political threat. "Go ahead and call the governor, Richard," the agent replied with a cold, dismissive smirk. "I am sure he would love to publicly associate himself with a family currently under investigation for massive international money laundering. Tell him the FBI says hello." Richard froze, his thumb hovering uselessly over his phone screen. He slowly lowered his hand, realizing that all his elite connections and political bribes were completely useless against a federal mandate. Up on the stage, the agents finally secured Jamal. They hauled him roughly to his feet, his custom tuxedo torn and his arms pinned awkwardly behind his broad back. As they began marching him down the center aisle toward the main exit, a sudden heavy silence fell over the chaotic ballroom. The frantic whispers of the wealthy crowd abruptly ceased. The sea of panicked socialites and terrified executives naturally parted down the middle, creating a wide, clear path. I walked slowly through the grand entrance of the ballroom, stepping precisely onto the imported silk carpets. I looked absolutely immaculate. I wore a pristine tailored crimson power suit that commanded instant visual authority. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression completely unbitten by the emotional wreckage surrounding me. I exuded absolute unyielding power. Every single eye in that massive room was locked entirely on me. They were looking at the brilliant forensic auditor who had single-handedly orchestrated the spectacular destruction of the arrogant man being dragged away in chains. I walked down the center aisle, my sharp heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. I did not look at the terrified guests. I did not look at my hyperventilating mother or my defeated father. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on the humiliated fraud walking toward me. Jamal stopped struggling against the agent's grip the exact moment he saw me approaching. His dark eyes widened with a toxic mixture of absolute shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. The reality of my meticulous trap finally clicked perfectly into place inside his arrogant brain. He realized that the seemingly vulnerable offshore routing server he had hacked was never a mistake. It was a perfectly designed digital snare, and he had willingly stepped right into it out of sheer greed. The agents paused their march, allowing the dramatic confrontation to unfold in the center of the silent ballroom. Jamal glared down at me, his face twisted with vicious, desperate rage. He spat viciously, aiming for my feet, but the saliva landed harmlessly on the carpet. "You set me up!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with the sheer magnitude of his bruised pride. "You laid a digital trap, and you entrapped me. You forced me to take that money." I stopped walking mere inches from his ruined tuxedo. I looked into his furious, desperate eyes with a calm and steady gaze. I allowed a cold, predatory smile to form on my lips. I made sure my voice was loud and clear enough for every elite politician, wealthy investor, and family member in that ballroom to hear my final execution. "I did not force you to steal Jamal." I stated my words ringing with lethal, absolute authority. "I left the vault open to see if you were a thief. You did the rest." The federal agents did not pause to let Jamal deliver a final dramatic monologue. They shoved him roughly forward, marching him and the disgraced Mr. Kensington through the grand double doors and out into the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting tactical vehicles. The moment the heavy brass doors swung shut behind them, the spell holding the elite crowd captive was instantly broken. Mass panic was immediately replaced by a frantic, self-serving exodus. The powerful politicians, the wealthy real estate developers, and the high society socialites all scrambled for the coat check. Nobody said a single word of comfort to my parents. Nobody offered to help my sister up from the floor. They abandoned the Blackwell family with the exact same ruthless efficiency they used in their corporate boardrooms. Within 10 minutes, the magnificent ballroom was completely deserted. The lavish 35th anniversary gala was nothing more than a ghost town of half-empty crystal champagne flutes, discarded silk napkins, and overturned mahogany chairs. The live string orchestra had vanished out the service exit, leaving their sheet music scattered across the empty stage. The silence in the cavernous room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Only 4 people remained inside the ruined hall. My father Richard stood frozen near the abandoned private bar. His expensive tuxedo looked rumpled and his arrogant posture had completely collapsed. My sister Vanessa was still sprawled on the imported silk carpet, her designer emerald gown torn and soaked in spilled alcohol. She was weeping so violently that her breath came in ragged, ugly gasps. She clutched her arms around her stomach, rocking back and forth as the reality of her husband facing a federal prison sentence finally crushed her fabricated reality. Then there was my mother. Patricia stood trembling near the melting ice sculpture. The elite social life she had spent 35 years meticulously building had just burned to ashes in front of her very eyes. She looked at the empty ballroom, then looked at me standing immaculately in my tailored crimson suit. The final remnants of her narcissistic pride violently shattered. The powerful, condescending matriarch who had thrown me out into the freezing rain 11 years ago completely broke down. Patricia took 3 unsteady steps toward me and dropped heavily onto her knees. The hard impact against the wooden floorboards echoed loudly in the quiet room. She did not care about her ruined dress. She did not care about her dignity. She clasped her manicured hands together in front of her chest and looked up at me with raw, pathetic desperation. "Audrey, please," Patricia begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "You have to tell the FBI it was a misunderstanding. You have the power to stop this investigation. Jamal is facing 15 years in a federal penitentiary. He will not survive it. You are destroying your sister's entire life. Look at her. She has nothing left. We are your family. You cannot do this to your own blood." I stared down at the woman kneeling on the floor. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel the familiar childhood urge to comfort her or seek her approval. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, analytical observation. I slowly walked over to a nearby table, picked up a clean linen napkin, and wiped a drop of spilled champagne from my leather briefcase. "You are asking me to commit federal perjury to save a man who just intentionally stole $10 million from my corporate accounts," I stated, my voice echoing with lethal calmness across the empty ballroom. "You want me to risk my own freedom and my professional empire to protect a thief who mocked me while he was robbing me?" Vanessa lifted her tear-stained face from the carpet. He only did it because you backed us into a corner, Vanessa sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You froze our money. You threatened to take our house. You forced him to make a desperate choice. I turned my sharp gaze to my ruined sister. I forced him to do absolutely nothing, Vanessa. I audited a fraudulent portfolio. I initiated a legal foreclosure on defaulted debt. Those are standard corporate procedures. Jamal actively chose to contact a dark web hacker. Jamal actively chose to bypass a federal security node. He dug his own grave because his massive ego could not handle losing to the sister you both deemed a pathetic failure. Patricia crawled forward on her knees, desperately reaching out to grab the hem of my tailored trousers. I stepped back smoothly, refusing to let her touch me. Please, Audrey. Patricia sobbed, fresh tears ruining her expensive makeup. I am begging you as your mother. I brought you into this world. I know I made mistakes. I know I was hard on you. But I did it because I wanted you to be strong. I wanted you to succeed. You cannot punish us like this. It is too cruel. Cruel, I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the stale air. Was it not cruel when you packed my belongings in garbage bags and changed the locks on the house? Was it not cruel when you told all your wealthy friends that I was a deranged disappointment who threw her life away? You did not push me to be strong, Patricia. You broke me down so you could feel superior. The only reason I survived is because I realized your conditional love was a toxic asset. The absolute finality in my voice finally broke my father. Richard slowly walked away from the abandoned bar. He looked like a hollow shell of a man. His corporate empire, his country club reputation, and his arrogant pride were all permanently eradicated. He stopped a few feet away from me, his shoulders slumped forward in total defeat. He looked at his wife weeping on the floor, and his youngest daughter completely broken. He raised his trembling hands in a gesture of absolute surrender. We will give you whatever you want. Richard begs, his raspy voice completely stripped of its usual booming authority. We will publicly apologize. Just give us the house back. Save us. Richard stared at me with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for a lifeline that would never come. I looked down at my parents. My mother was still kneeling on the ruined silk carpet, her expensive emerald dress stained with spilled champagne and her perfect makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. My father stood with his shoulders slumped, his tailored tuxedo looking suddenly too large for his shrinking frame. My sister Vanessa remained curled into a miserable ball nearby, weeping hysterically for a husband who was currently being processed into a federal holding facility. I looked at the three of them and felt an overwhelming sense of absolute clarity. The terrified 22-year-old girl who was thrown out into the freezing rain with nothing but a cheap suitcase was finally avenged. I had spent 11 years carrying the heavy burden of their rejection, wondering if I was truly the worthless disappointment they claimed I was. Tonight, I finally understood that their rejection had nothing to do with my value. It had everything to do with their profound corruption. They discarded me because my integrity threatened their fragile, fraudulent empire. Now that empire was entirely gone. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice or throw a dramatic tantrum the way they always did when they felt cornered. My voice was terrifyingly gentle, cutting through the dead silence of the abandoned ballroom with surgical precision. You want to give me whatever I want, Richard? I asked, tilting my head slightly. You want to publicly apologize and welcome me back into the family fold just to save your precious mansion. My father nodded eagerly, completely missing the lethal danger hiding beneath my calm tone. Yes, Audrey, he begged, stepping closer, but stopping when I held up a single hand. We will do anything you ask. We can release a joint statement to the press tomorrow morning. We can say it was all a terrible misunderstanding and that we are proud of the incredible business you built. We can repair our image together. We can fix this. I smiled a cold, empty smile that made my father flinch. You cannot give me what I want because you do not possess anything of actual value, I replied. You are offering me counterfeit currency. Your public apologies are entirely worthless to me. Your public validation means absolutely nothing. You did not care about my life when you threw me out into the street. You did not care if I starved or froze or failed. You did not care when you explicitly stole my grandfather's trust to fund Jamal's arrogant career. You watched me struggle from afar and you laughed about it behind closed doors. You only care now because the check bounced. Patricia let out a fresh sob, pressing her manicured hands against her chest. We were trying to protect the family. She wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her own miserable lies. We thought Jamal was making smart investments. We thought he was securing our legacy. We did not know he was committing federal crimes. You knew exactly what he was doing. Patricia, I countered, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You knew the seed money was stolen from my inheritance. You knew the luxury mortgage payments were being diverted to offshore shell companies. You willfully ignored every single red flag because Jamal bought you expensive jewelry and funded your lavish charity galas. You happily traded your own daughter for a few years of high society prestige. You chose your comfortable illusions over my actual survival. You enabled a thief because it paid for your country club membership. You do not get to play the innocent victim now that the federal government has seized your stolen assets. You are just as guilty as the man sitting in the back of that armored vehicle. Vanessa finally uncurled from her ball on the floor. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, her face twisted in a mixture of profound grief and lingering entitlement. What am I supposed to do? Vanessa demanded, her voice trembling with raw panic. Jamal is gone. The bank accounts are completely frozen. I have absolutely no money and nowhere to go. You are my sister Audrey. You have to help me. You have millions of dollars. You can afford to put me up in a nice apartment until this blows over. You owe me that much after ruining my life. I stared at my sister, marveling at the sheer audacity of her demand. Even as her fake world collapsed around her, she still expected me to serve as her personal safety net. I do not owe you a single thing, Vanessa, I stated firmly. You spent your entire adult life mocking my hard work while you lived effortlessly off stolen capital. You cheered when they kicked me out. You bragged to your friends about my supposed failures. You gladly wore designer clothes purchased with my grandfather's money. Now you get to experience the exact same reality you forced upon me 11 years ago. You get to figure out how to survive when nobody is willing to hand you a blank check. It is time for you to finally grow up and get a real job. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored crimson blazer and picked up my leather briefcase. The grand ballroom felt suffocatingly stale. I had completely exhausted my patience for their pathetic tears. The execution was officially over. I turned my back on them, walking toward the grand exit. Richard called out my name one final time, his voice breaking with sheer terror. Audrey. Please, Richard cried out. Where are we supposed to sleep? I stopped walking. The eviction stands, I announced, my voice echoing cleanly off the marble walls. The foreclosure stands. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my property before the local sheriff's department physically removes you from the premises. Do not take the appliances. I turned on my heel and walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving my shattered family to face the absolute ruin they had spent 11 years building for themselves. The heavy brass doors closed behind me, severing my ties to them forever. 3 months passed since the night of the anniversary gala. The spectacular downfall of the Blackwell family played out publicly across every major financial news outlet and society column in the city. The consequences of their arrogant greed were swift and entirely unmerciful. Jamal found out the hard way that his supposed elite connections meant absolutely nothing when facing the full wrath of the federal government. The judge explicitly denied his request for bail, citing his proven ability to bypass international financial firewalls and his extreme flight risk. The brilliant self-made real estate genius was currently sitting in a stark concrete cell at a federal holding facility awaiting a criminal trial that would undoubtedly end in a 15-year prison sentence. His luxury custom suits were replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The offshore dummy accounts were entirely seized by the government, leaving his legal defense relying on overworked public defenders. Mr. Kensington fared no better in the aftermath. The cowardly family lawyer who tried to extort me over a Thanksgiving turkey faced immediate disbarment. The state legal board stripped him of his prestigious law license the moment the federal indictments became public record. His elite legal firm disavowed him, firing him without severance and clearing out his corner office before he even made bail. Kensington was currently facing his own conspiracy charges, completely disgraced and permanently exiled from the lucrative legal world he once arrogantly dominated. My sister Vanessa experienced the harshest reality check of her entirely fabricated life. With Jamal's assets completely frozen and eventually seized, she was left entirely broke and buried under a mountain of secondary debt. She discovered her 50,000 social media followers did not translate into a sustainable income when her luxury lifestyle disappeared. Brands dropped her sponsorships overnight, refusing to associate their products with the wife of a convicted federal fraudster. Having never acquired a college degree or held a legitimate job in her adult life, Vanessa found herself completely unemployable in the corporate sector. The woman who once sobbed over a declined platinum card at a luxury boutique was forcefully evicted from her lavish penthouse. She was forced to pack whatever meager belongings the federal agents did not seize into cheap cardboard boxes. She relocated to a tiny, cramped studio apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood on the far outskirts of the city. There were no imported silk sheets or private elevator banks. For the first time in her 30 years of existence, Vanessa had to figure out how to navigate public transportation and apply for minimum wage retail jobs just to keep the electricity turned on in her miserable new reality. But the most poetic justice was reserved entirely for my parents. Richard and Patricia had spent their entire lives worshiping the superficial idol of high society prestige. They sacrificed their own daughter on the altar of their country club reputation. Now that reputation was permanently eradicated. Their wealthy friends blocked their phone numbers. The exclusive country club revoked their membership immediately, citing the moral turpitude clause in their bylaws. Without my corporate subsidiaries to artificially float their massive personal debts, their financial collapse was absolute and irreversible. Their credit scores plummeted to catastrophic levels, making it entirely impossible to secure even a basic rental agreement in any respectable neighborhood. On a bleak Tuesday morning, I sat comfortably in the back seat of my black Maybach. The vehicle was parked discreetly across the street from the sprawling Connecticut mansion I now legally owned. The sky was dark and heavy, pouring freezing rain down onto the pristine, manicured lawns. Through the heavily tinted bulletproof windows, I watched my parents experiencing the bitter harvest of their lifelong cruelty. They could not afford to hire a professional moving company. Richard and Patricia were physically loading their final boxes into the back of a cheap rented moving truck themselves. Richard slipped on the wet driveway, struggling under the weight of a heavy cardboard box filled with worthless porcelain trinkets. Patricia looked haggard and exhausted, her hair plastered to her face by the freezing rain as she shoved a plastic garbage bag full of old clothes into the back of the dirty truck. They were soaking wet, freezing cold, and completely devoid of the arrogant dignity they once wielded like a weapon. They looked exactly like the terrified, broke 22-year-old girl they had thrown out into the storm 11 years ago. I took a slow sip of my hot black coffee, savoring the rich dark roast. The warmth of the luxurious vehicle contrasted sharply with the freezing misery unfolding across the street. I opened my sleek silver laptop resting on the leather fold-down tray. I navigated to the encrypted corporate folder labeled Blackwell Estate Holdings. I reviewed the final liquidation documents confirming that every single toxic asset had been successfully seized, restructured, and cleanly absorbed into my financial empire. I clicked the small icon in the corner of the screen and permanently closed the file on my family. I tapped the glass partition separating me from the driver and calmly instructed him to take me back to Manhattan. The Maybach pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving my parents behind in the freezing rain to finish packing their ruined lives. Some people say blood is thicker than water. But in my line of work, I have learned that blood is just another liability on a balance sheet. Sometimes you just have to liquidate the bad debt. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family to save yourself? Let me know in the comments. Hit subscribe and never let anyone tell you that you are not enough. Reflecting on Audrey's intense journey, the most striking takeaway is the realization that toxic family dynamics often disguise conditional exploitation as love. For 11 long years, Audrey carried the heavy weight of her family's rejection. Her parents and sister made her feel like an absolute failure, simply because she refused to be a pawn in their illegal schemes. Society frequently pushes the narrative that blood is thicker than water, urging us to forgive and endure the transgressions of abusive relatives just because we share DNA. However, this story powerfully shatters that dangerous illusion. It teaches us that true family is defined by mutual respect, safety, and integrity, not by shared genetics or the desperate preservation of a wealthy public image. When her parents finally begged for forgiveness in the ruined ballroom, they were not mourning the loss of their daughter. They were only mourning the loss of their sprawling mansion, their stolen money, and their elite social status. Audrey's ultimate triumph was not merely the financial acquisition of their corporate debt, but her complete emotional liberation. She finally understood that her intrinsic value was never tied to their conditional approval. Sometimes the most powerful and necessary thing you can do for your own mental health is to enforce uncompromising boundaries. We must learn to stop seeking validation from people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding and using us. Audrey built an empire by believing in herself when nobody else would, proving that your worth is determined by your character, not by the people who abandoned you. We all deserve relationships that nurture our growth rather than liabilities that drain our spirit. If you are ready to stop letting toxic people define your worth, subscribe to our channel and share this message with someone who needs the strength to walk away today.